The Wi-Fi password Harvard Library 2024 flickered on Marcus. Washington's cracked phone screen as he crouched behind a dumpster, rain soaking through his threadbare hoodie. In 30 seconds, he would accidentally change the trajectory of theoretical physics forever. He just didn't know it yet. Marcus pressed his ear against the library's back wall, listening for security guards. The building had been his sanctuary for 3 months, ever since he discovered the loose window grate that led to the basement storage room where forgotten computers hummed with life. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, he wasn't just stealing warmth and Wi-Fi. Tonight, he was about to crash Professor Elena Vasquez's Advanced Quantum Mechanics seminar. The Zoom link had been surprisingly easy to find. A careless graduate student had posted it on their public Twitter account, probably thinking only other Harvard elites would care about quantum entanglement applications in parallel universe theory. Marcus had been studying quantum physics from library books for 2 years, teaching himself calculus on napkins and working through equations in his head, while other homeless teens his age worried about their next meal. What Professor Vasquez didn't know was that the homeless kid about to interrupt her class had already solved the theoretical framework she'd been struggling with for the past decade. Marcus connected to the Zoom call at exactly 7:47 p.m. His camera was off, a blessing considering his appearance, but his microphone was accidentally unmuted. On screen, he could see 12 graduate students and Professor Vasquez herself, a renowned physicist whose papers Marcus had memorized from cover to cover. As we can see from the Schrödinger equation modifications, Professor Vasquez was saying, the mathematics becomes increasingly complex when we attempt to model consciousness as a quantum observer effect across multiple dimensional planes. Actually, Professor, Marcus's voice cut through the audio before he could stop himself. The words had tumbled out involuntarily, a habit formed from years of silent disagreement with textbooks. The complexity disappears if you apply the Henderson-Yang theorem in reverse and account for temporal displacement coefficients. The Zoom room fell silent. Professor Vasquez's eyes widened. I'm sorry, who just spoke? Everyone should have their microphones muted, unless, sorry, Marcus whispered, frantically trying to figure out how to leave the call. But his curiosity got the better of him. It's just ... The equation you wrote on the whiteboard, it's missing a variable. The graduate students began looking around at each other with confused expressions. Professor Vasquez squinted at her computer screen. I don't recognize your name on the participant list. Are you auditing the class? Marcus's heart hammered. He should hang up, he should run. Instead, he found himself saying, the consciousness coefficient. You're treating awareness as a constant, but what if it's actually the variable that determines which parallel universe becomes reality? The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Dr. Sarah Chun, one of the graduate students, unmuted herself. That's actually not a terrible point. But consciousness isn't quantifiable in quantum mechanics, isn't it? Marcus asked, his voice gaining confidence despite his circumstances. Roger Penrose suggested consciousness emerges from quantum processes in microtubules. If consciousness is quantum, then it has to follow quantum rules. And if it follows quantum rules, it can be calculated. Professor Vasquez was now leaning forward, completely focused on her screen. Young man, I need you to turn on your camera. I want to see who I'm talking to. Marcus's blood turned to ice. I can't. My camera's broken. Then tell me your name. Are you a student here? Another silence. Then, quietly, Marcus Washington. And no, ma'am, I'm not a student anywhere. The admission hung in the digital air like a bomb waiting to explode. Not a student anywhere? Professor Vasquez repeated slowly. Then how do you know about the Henderson-Yang theorem? It was only published last month in the Journal of Theoretical Physics. The subscription costs $3,000 annually. Marcus felt trapped. The truth was embarrassing. He'd hacked into the journal's database using the library's computers, not out of malice but out of desperate hunger for knowledge. I read a lot. Marcus, Professor Vasquez's voice had softened. I'm going to ask you again to turn on your camera. I think we need to see who we're talking to. Professor, I really can't. I'm not in a good place right now. Doctor. Chun unmuted again, her voice curious rather than accusatory. Marcus, can you walk us through your consciousness coefficient idea? Because if you're right, it would revolutionize how we understand quantum observation. Against every instinct screaming at him to run, Marcus found himself drawing equations on the back of a pizza box he'd found in the dumpster. Okay, so if you start with the basic quantum wave function, but instead of treating the observer as external, you make consciousness itself a quantum variable. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus guided 12 Harvard graduate students and one of the world's leading quantum physicists through a theoretical framework that had been eluding researchers for decades. He spoke with the passion of someone who'd never had anyone to share his ideas with, his voice growing stronger with each equation. My God, whispered Dr. James Rodriguez, another graduate student. This actually works. Professor, are you seeing this? Professor Vasquez had been frantically scribbling notes. Marcus, I need to know where you learned this. This level of theoretical understanding doesn't just happen. You'd need years of advanced study. Books, Marcus said simply. Lots and lots of books. Books don't teach intuitive leaps like this, Professor Vasquez insisted. Marcus, please, turn on your camera. I promise you, whatever your situation is, we're not here to judge. Marcus looked around the storage room that had become his classroom. His shelter, his world. Rain was still pounding on the windows above. In a few hours, security would do their rounds, and he'd have to hide in the shadows until they passed. This moment, this connection with minds that understood the beauty of theoretical physics, felt like a dream he was about to wake up from. Professor, he said quietly, what if I told you I've been living in your library for 3 months? The Zoom room erupted. What do you mean, living in the library? Dr. Chun asked. I mean I'm homeless. I've been sleeping in the basement storage room and using the computers to study. I know it's wrong, and I know I'm probably in huge trouble, but I couldn't stop learning. The books down there. They were like finding treasure. Professor Vasquez's expression had shifted from curiosity to something Marcus couldn't quite identify. Marcus, how old are you? 17. Another explosion of surprised voices. You're 17? Dr. Rodriguez sounded incredulous. And you just solved a problem my PhD thesis has been stuck on for 2 years? Where are your parents, Marcus? Professor Vasquez asked gently. Mom died 3 years ago. Cancer. Dad. I don't know where my dad is. Has been gone since I was 10. Marcus's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. Foster care didn't work out. Been on my own for about 18 months now. The Zoom room had gone completely quiet. Professor Vasquez cleared her throat. Marcus, I want you to stay on this call. Don't hang up. Can you do that for me? Why? Because in about 10 minutes, campus security is going to come find you, and I want to make sure they know you're not an intruder. You're our guest. Marcus's heart stopped. Professor, please, I'll leave. I'll never come back. Just don't. Marcus, her voice was firm but kind. You're not in trouble. Do you understand me? You're not in trouble. But I've been stealing. You've been learning. There's a difference. Professor Vasquez was already typing on another device. Dr. Chun, can you stay on the call with Marcus? I need to make some phone calls. As Professor Vasquez stepped away from her computer, Marcus could hear her speaking rapidly to someone off camera. Words like exceptional circumstances and immediate intervention floated through the audio. Dr. Chun's face filled more of the screen as she leaned forward. Marcus, can you tell me what other subjects you've been studying? Everything I can get my hands on. Physics, mathematics, computer science, philosophy. I taught myself programming and hacked into some academic databases. He paused. I know. That was wrong, but the knowledge was just sitting there, and I needed it. You hacked into academic databases? Dr. Rodriguez had rejoined the conversation. Which ones? JSTOR, IEEE, Nature, Science. About 47 different journals and archives. The graduate students exchanged looks. Marcus, Dr. Chun said. Carefully, those databases have some of the most sophisticated security systems in the world. How did you get through them? Pattern recognition mostly. Security systems are just puzzles, and I've always been good at puzzles. Marcus shrugged, not understanding why everyone looked so shocked. Plus, I had a lot of time to work on it. Professor Vasquez returned to her computer, her expression intense. Marcus, campus security is going to be there in about 3 minutes. I need you to listen very carefully. You are not in trouble. They're coming to help you, not arrest you. Do you understand? Help me how? We're going to start by getting you somewhere warm and safe to sleep tonight. Then we're going to figure out the rest. Marcus felt tears threatening for the first time in months. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Marcus, Professor Vasquez's voice was gentle. In the past 30 minutes, you've demonstrated theoretical insights that most PhD students never achieve. You've been living in a basement, teaching yourself advanced physics from stolen textbooks, and you just casually mentioned hacking some of the most secure academic databases in the world. We don't need to know you better to know you're extraordinary. A sound echoed through the storage room footsteps in the hallway above. That's them, Marcus whispered. Marcus, I want you to tell them that Professor Vasquez is expecting them. Can you do that? The footsteps were getting closer. A flashlight beam swept past the small window near the ceiling. Professor, Marcus said urgently, before they get here, I need to tell you something else. What is it? The consciousness coefficient equation? It's not complete. There's a second part that explains how consciousness doesn't just choose which universe becomes real. It actually creates new universes in the process. I think I can prove that every conscious decision branches reality into infinite new timelines. The Zoom room fell silent once again. Dr. Chun whispered, That's a unified theory of consciousness and quantum mechanics. If it's correct, Dr. Rodriguez added, it would be the most significant physics discovery in a century. The footsteps had stopped right outside the storage room. Marcus could hear voices. Should be right through here. Professor Vasquez said to look for a young black male, 17 years old. Marcus, Professor Vasquez said quickly, I want you to keep that theory to yourself for now. Don't share it with anyone until we can get you properly protected, academically speaking. Do you understand? Protected how? The storage room door opened, and flashlight beams flooded Marcus's makeshift shelter. To campus security. Officers stepped inside, their expressions shifting from stern to surprised as they took in the scene. A teenager surrounded by advanced physics textbooks, equations scrawled on cardboard and napkins, and a sophisticated computer setup jerry-rigged from discarded university equipment. Are you Marcus Washington? The first officer asked. Yes, sir. Son, you're not in any trouble. Professor Vasquez asked us to bring you to her office. She says you're expected. Marcus looked at his phone screen, where Professor Vasquez was nodding encouragingly. Is this real? This isn't some kind of trick? No trick, Marcus, Professor Vasquez said through the phone speaker. Officers, can you escort Marcus to my office in the physics building? And please, treat him as you would any other student. As Marcus gathered his few possessions, a backpack containing 2 changes of clothes, a notebook filled with equations, and a photo of his mother, he felt like he was living in someone else's life. The walk across campus was surreal. Marcus had spent so many nights watching the illuminated windows of lecture halls and dormitories, imagining what it would be like to belong in this world of learning and discovery. Now he was walking through the front doors of the physics building, escorted like an honored guest rather than a trespasser. Professor Vasquez was waiting in her office, along with Dr. Chun and two people Marcus didn't recognize, a woman in a Harvard administrator's badge and a man in an expensive-looking suit. Marcus, Professor Vasquez stood as he entered. "I'd like you to meet Dean Patricia Williams from the Office of Student Affairs, and this is Dr. Michael Harrison from the Kavli Institute for Theoretical Physics." Marcus shook their hands awkwardly, hyper-aware of his rumpled clothes and the fact that he probably smelled like the storage room he'd been living in. "Marcus," Dean Williams said gently, "we understand you've been living in less than ideal circumstances. Our immediate priority is getting you safe housing and proper support. But Professor Vasquez has also told us about your academic abilities, and we want to discuss some opportunities." "What kind of opportunities?" Dr. Harrison leaned forward. "Marcus, I've been listening to a recording of your conversation tonight. The theoretical work you outlined. It's groundbreaking. The Kavli Institute would like to offer you a full research fellowship." Marcus blinked. "I don't understand. I'm not even a high school graduate." "That," said Dean Williams, "is something we can work around. Marcus, how would you feel about taking your GED next month and then beginning as a special admission student in our undergraduate physics program? But I don't have money for tuition or housing or full scholarship, Dr. Harrison interrupted. "Housing, meals, tuition, books, and a research stipend. The only requirement is that you continue developing your theoretical work under Professor Vasquez's guidance." Marcus sat down heavily, overwhelmed. "This is really happening?" Professor Vasquez knelt beside his chair. "Marcus, there's something else. The consciousness quantum mechanics theory you mentioned. If you can develop it fully, it could change everything we understand about reality itself. But that kind of work comes with risks." "What kind of risks?" "Academic theft, for one. If word gets out about your theory before it's properly published and attributed to you, someone else might try to claim credit. We need to protect your intellectual property while you develop the full framework." Dr. Harrison nodded. "That's why we want to move quickly. Get you enrolled, get you proper academic credentials, and get your work officially documented as your own." "There's one more thing," Dean Williams added. "We ran a background check standard procedure for any student housing application. Marcus, did you know there's been a missing persons report filed for you?" Marcus's heart sank. "Foster care?" "No, your father." The room went silent. "My father?" Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. "David Washington. He's been looking for you for over a year. According to the report, he's been in substance abuse treatment and wants to reconnect. He has no idea you've been homeless." Marcus felt the world spinning. His father, the man who'd abandoned him and his dying mother, had been looking for him? Where is he? "Boston. About 30 minutes from here." "Marcus, you don't have to see him if you don't want to. But he's been sober for 14 months, and he's asking for a chance to make amends." Professor Vasquez squeezed Marcus's shoulder. "Whatever you decide about your father, it doesn't change what we're offering you here. You have a place at Harvard regardless." Marcus looked around the room at these people who, 3 hours ago, had been complete strangers. Now they were offering him everything he'd dreamed of and more. "Can I ask you something, Professor?" Marcus said. "Anything. Why? Why are you doing all this for me?" Professor Vasquez smiled. "Marcus, do you know how long I've been working on quantum consciousness theory? 12 years, according to your published papers. 12 years. And tonight, in 30 minutes, you advanced the field further than I had in over a decade. Minds like yours don't come along often. Maybe once in a generation. We're not doing this just to help you. We're doing this because your work might help humanity understand consciousness itself." Dr. Harrison opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Marcus, there's something else you should know. After tonight's call, I reached out to some colleagues. The theoretical framework you described, 3 other major research institutions have been working toward similar conclusions. MIT, Stanford, and Oxford. If your complete theory is what I think it is, you're not just looking at a Harvard education. You're looking at a Nobel Prize. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. A Nobel Prize? Eventually, yes. But first, you need to finish developing the theory. And for that, you need resources, guidance, and protection. Dean Williams set a tablet on the table in front of Marcus. These are temporary housing options available immediately. Tomorrow, we can look at permanent dormitory assignments for the fall semester. Marcus scrolled through images of comfortable single rooms, each larger than the storage space he'd been calling home. This is really real? It's real, Marcus. And my father? Professor Vasquez exchanged glances with the others. That's entirely up to you. We can arrange a meeting, or we can simply let him know you're safe. No pressure either way. Marcus stared at the tablet screen, then at the faces around him. 6 months ago, he'd been digging through garbage cans for dinner. 3 hours ago, he'd been a homeless kid stealing Wi-Fi. Now he was being offered a path to academic immortality. Professor, he said slowly, the consciousness theory? I need to tell you the rest of it. Marcus, we should wait until... No. His voice was firm. You need to understand what you're really offering me protection for. He stood up and walked to the whiteboard in Professor Vasquez's office. The consciousness coefficient doesn't just explain how awareness creates reality branches. It proves that consciousness is the fundamental force that creates space and time themselves. Marcus began writing equations, his hand moving rapidly across the board. If this is correct, and I believe it is, then consciousness isn't something that emerged from the universe. Consciousness is the universe. Every conscious being is literally creating reality moment by moment. The room had gone completely quiet. The implications are... Dr. Harrison trailed off. Staggering, Professor Vasquez finished. Marcus, if this is provable, it doesn't just change physics. It changes philosophy, religion, our understanding of what it means to be human. Marcus turned back to face them. That's why I've been scared to share it. This isn't just academic theory. If I'm right, it means every person has the power to literally reshape reality through conscious intention. Dean Williams leaned back in her chair. And you figured this out living in a basement? I had a lot of time to think. Marcus managed a small smile and excellent books. Dr. Harrison was photographing the equations on the whiteboard with his phone. Marcus, we need to get this documented and protected immediately. This level of theoretical breakthrough. There will be people who want to exploit it. What do you mean? I mean governments, corporations, religious institutions. If consciousness really is the fundamental creative force of reality, imagine what various groups might do with that knowledge. Professor Vasquez was nodding grimly. Marcus, I think we need to involve some people from the ethics department. And possibly legal. We need to make sure your work is protected not just academically, but legally and personally. Am I in danger? Potentially, yes. But we're going to make sure you're protected. Marcus sat back down suddenly. Exhausted. 3 hours ago, my biggest worry was whether security would find me before morning. Now you're telling me I might have discovered something that could change human civilization. That's exactly what we're telling you, Dr. Harrison said. Dean Williams closed her tablet. Marcus, I think we need to get you settled. For tonight, and then tomorrow we can start dealing with the larger implications. Are you ready to see your temporary room? Marcus nodded, then paused. What about my father? What about him? If I'm going to be here, if I'm going to be a Harvard student, maybe it's time to face that part of my past too. Professor Vasquez smiled. We can arrange for him to visit campus next week, if you'd like. Give you time to settle in first. And if he's just looking for money, or if he's not really changed, then you'll have a support system here to help you deal with that, Dean Williams said. Marcus, you're not alone anymore. As they prepared to leave the office, Marcus took one last look at the equations on the whiteboard, symbols and numbers that might represent the most important discovery in human history. "Professor," he said, "there's one more thing about the theory." "What's that?" "If consciousness creates reality, and if every conscious decision branches into new universes, then somewhere out there, there's a universe where I never found that loose window grate. A universe where I never crashed your Zoom call tonight." Professor Vasquez considered this. "And what do you think is happening to that version of you?" Marcus smiled for the first time in months, a real smile, not the careful expressions he'd learned to wear for survival. "I think he's still cold, still hungry, and still trying to solve the universe's mysteries with stolen textbooks and pizza box paper. But I also think he's about to find his own miracle, because consciousness doesn't just create reality, it creates possibilities." "And in this reality?" "In this reality," Marcus said, picking up his backpack and following them toward the door, "a homeless kid just accidentally proved that the universe is made of dreams, and Harvard University is about to give him the resources to teach the world how to dream better." As they walked across the campus toward his new temporary home, Marcus Washington, formerly homeless, now Harvard's youngest theoretical physics researcher, looked up at the stars and wondered how many other versions of himself were looking back, each one a conscious observer creating their own branch of infinite reality. In 12 hours, his story would be international news. In 12 months, his equations would be revolutionizing quantum physics. In 12 years, he would stand in Stockholm, accepting a Nobel Prize for proving that consciousness and cosmos are one. But tonight, for the first time in years, Marcus Washington was simply a kid who was no longer cold, no longer hungry, and no longer alone. And in the quantum field of infinite possibilities, that seemed like the most miraculous reality of all. 5 years later, Dr. Marcus Washington adjusted his Harvard faculty badge as he prepared for his evening seminar. At 22, he was the youngest tenured professor in the university's history, and his consciousness reality theory had indeed changed the world, not just scientifically, but practically. The applications of his work had revolutionized therapy, education, and even global diplomacy. Neuroscience clinics were now using his equations to rewire trauma. Schools across the country had begun teaching students that their thoughts mattered, literally. And for those once trapped in cycles of poverty, violence, or despair, Marcus's theory offered something science rarely delivered: hope. His father sat in the front row of the lecture hall, 5 years sober, now working as a counselor for homeless youth in Boston. Their relationship hadn't been easy to rebuild, had required long nights of anger, forgiveness, silence, and conversation. But consciousness, Marcus had learned, was most powerful when it chose love over fear. "Today," Marcus began, addressing a room full of graduate students from around the world, "we're going to explore a question that changed my life. What happens when we stop seeing ourselves as victims of reality and start understanding ourselves as its creators?" In the back of the room, a young woman raised her hand. "Professor Washington, is it true you developed this theory while you were homeless?" Marcus smiled, remembering the damp storage room, the scrawled equations on pizza boxes, the night he'd crashed a Harvard Zoom call out of curiosity and loneliness. "I developed it because I was homeless." Sometimes our greatest limitations become our greatest teachers. When you have nothing but your mind and a universe of questions, you learn that consciousness isn't just what you have, it's what you are. The students scribbled notes, not just because of the theory, but because they were watching a man who had lived the message he taught. He had not just studied consciousness, he had used it to survive, to thrive, to change the damn game. The universe Marcus had discovered was far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had imagined. And sometimes it took a homeless black kid with nothing but genius, grief, and grit to remind humanity of the most important truth of all: reality isn't something that happens to you. Reality is something you create one conscious moment at a time, and every moment is a choice to create something beautiful. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you believe a little more in the power of possibility, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that matters. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded. Your circumstances don't define your potential, your consciousness does.